Lonesome Lands podcast. This is Lonesome Report edition. I'm Jim Mundorf, Shad Sullivan.
I'm here at the headwaters of Bitter Creek, Archer County, North Texas.
All right. Shad's got a microphone and a new camera, so hopefully that we're getting there. We're getting there. Someday I don't know. I don't think we'll ever be there, but anyway, I feel like after the election, just to get right into it, everyone kind of took a breath, because it seemed like we had like all of these just never ending attacks on freedom, especially in agriculture, I feel like. With the climate stuff and the EIDs, I mean, it all kind of tied together. And then, you know, we were like, okay, we got somebody in there. He says he doesn't want another windmill. He's calling climate change a hoax, all this stuff. And so, and people kind of relaxed a little bit, but now I feel like we're coming back to the point we can't relax. That's what I'm realizing, like just now sitting down, going over this outline of what's going on. It's like this fight is far from over and it's just going to be constant. And that's the thing. It's like this corporate kind of control of what they want to control everything of. It's not going anywhere. It's just changing forms a little bit because they're gonna kind of move and shake. But I mean, they're still building windmills. They're still looking for land to put solar panels on, all of that stuff. And and what really got me kind of into this, thinking about this, is this EID deal, which last week we talked about electronic identification on cattle. Um, to go back through the whole thing, the rule that USDA wanted was they wanted electronic identification ear tags on breeding age cattle that cross
Mhm.
state lines. That was the rule that everybody talked about. And actually we fought against. We didn't want that to happen because electronic ID, what we talked about was incrementalism. And that's the way you lose your freedom is you don't wake up one day and your freedoms are gone. It's the way it happens is it just chips away. And the EID is a big way for them to eventually control what you do with your cattle.
Correct.
And that goes back into, if you're a farmer, it goes into, this greenhouse gas emissions. They're trying to come up with ways where you can measure your greenhouse gas emissions, and they're trying to make it seem all, great, and this is how you're going to market your stuff and you're going to show your sustainability and all that. But what it comes down to is eventually they want to regulate that. Um, and so just to go into that incrementalism, last week we were talking about the EID thing, and because of the rule, I hadn't thought of, all cattle or breeding age cattle are, heifers, I guess, are vaccinated for brucellosis, which is bangs. I don't know what that, do you know what that acronym is?
Bangs? No, it's brucellosis.
Yeah, it's a brucellosis, which is a disease that buffalo
Re-
carry. And I mean, it's,
Reproductive disease.
yeah. Um, and when we would do that before, we would get a metal tag that gets pinched into that critter's ear and it has a number on it. But everybody's saying now that the vets aren't bringing out those brucellosis, aren't bringing out the metal tags. They're only doing EID tags. And so as we looked into, said last week, we should have better information on this. And what it turns out is those metal tags are no longer looked at by the USDA as an official identification. So they don't mean anything, apparently, anymore. If you have metal tags in your cattle, I guess they don't mean, they can't be put in anymore. That's what
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
talked to
If your
somebody
cat, right.
who is in the know. They sent me this article from University of Lincoln Extension Office that said vets are not going to be used metal tags anymore. They're only going to use EID tags for brucellosis vaccination or for the bangs vaccination. And that goes back to that rule. Like they said that the only reason your cattle would have to have EID tags was um, if they're breeding age over, was it 18 months? Yeah, over 18
Correct.
months and crossing state lines. That's the only reason you'd have to put an EID tag in them. Well, now it comes out if you have, um, if you want to vaccinate your heifers for bangs and have it, done the right way, you have to use the ID tags. I mean, that's the incrementalism. They passed this rule and didn't say anything about this is the only way you're going to have to use these tags. But as soon, and that article that I got sent was September. So I think the rule passed in October. A month later, the USDA comes out and says, you have to use this on every one of your heifers. I mean, that's the incrementalism. And then in part of that article, which I'll try to link to, they said that, well, if you tag all your calves with the EID tags, and then the vet doesn't have to bring them when he comes and he can just write that number down. So then, I mean, you have to tag your calf anyway. So why not just use the EID tag? And then the vet doesn't have to bring them and he probably won't charge you for having to tag them or whatever. All he has to do is come out and write the number down when they're going through to get
Ain't gonna
vaccinated.
charge you.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, they're like, well, make it easy and just tag all your calves with EID, right? The crazy thing is it like you don't have to have a tag that anyone can read. So reading the number, the whole thing goes back. Their excuse is disease traceability, but this doesn't do anything for disease traceability any different than the metal tags because the EIDs don't have to hold any information. They just have to have a premise ID, which is the vets could always trace those numbers back to your place if as far as the bangs tags. But now they're telling, you know, they're because it was all tied back to the vet, but now the vet is telling some people that they have to register their premise ID, which I wasn't able to get too far into that, um but what it is now is you just have an electronic identification and you don't have to have any sort of tag or any sort of information on that tag except I does it even have to have the premise in the thing or it just has to be recorded?
Yeah, you're supposed to register your premise.
Right, but that's no different than the metal. And they
Correct.
said
No, it
it doesn't.
is. I don't think with the metal you have to have a premise registration.
Right, but they can just trace it. If they
Correct.
read a metal tag, USDA can figure out where it comes from real quick.
Absolutely. They figure out where it comes from the veterinarian. First, there's a state letter on there, and then there's a number, and they can trace that through that letter and number.
Right. But what
So I
I'm
think,
saying is there's this tiny little number on an EID tag. If you've seen them, they're about this big around, which is like the size of a quarter. And there's a little number on there. And in that article, it said all you have to have is that number that's viewable on that little button, which
yeah,
is the same size as the number on
you still
the
have to
metal
read it
tag.
if you don't have a tag. If you don't have a wand, you still have to read it.
Yeah.
And they
And
the
most people, I mean, there's no requirements for wands. There's no
right.
requirements for anybody. So that goes into the incrementalism. Like
Yes.
we're just getting you set up so that
Mm-hmm.
all of your animals have these electronic identifications.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's correct.
whether it's to tell you what you have to have or what you don't have to have, like right now, there's people who have EID tags and they register all of their rations and all their vaccinations and everything on those EID tags. And it's really good and simple for them. And they're in certain programs where the beef packers pay more because all of that information can be verified. And so now that they are getting they're getting everybody used to having these EID tags, then they'll get you used to what you have to have on there. And then packers, all cattle will have all their rations and all their vaccinations and everything on there. When the climate and you can't look at this deal like we're never going to have a climate crazy administration again because, and so when that comes, if that ever comes back around, they're going to have register measure your greenhouse gases, how many times your cattle get rotated, what was, were they fed this seaweed ration crap that I'm seeing about just this morning? I mean, it just goes back into all this stuff. Like we have an administration that seems much more friendly to personal freedoms, but we still
Uh,
need to be pushing. The Mod family is still facing prison time for offense that was have been there for decades. You know, I just feel like we just can't relax. And how come this EID? mandate hasn't been removed.
Well,
If we have a administration, if we have a USDA that is for personal freedom, is America first, is against all this stuff, is it because they're listening to the Farm Bureau lobbyists, NCBA?
yeah, it is. It's absolutely the reason. And this is nothing new. It's all when you talk about incrementalism, we're more than halfway through the point of incrementalism. And we see that with, like they came out and announced who was the new CDC director. Very climate change friendly. That was yesterday. Beef Magazine putting out a podcast, so to speak, on, rules and regulations and sustainable development yesterday. Their 5 viewers all liked it. Um,
They had a podcast. So this is new.
oh, it's brand new. It's brand new. I
You
think
just
I
saw it
think
this morning or what?
I saw it yesterday. They're flailing and they're looking for something to hold them up, I guess. But they were talking about the beef quality assurance program and how all of these regulations, including EID, lend itself into the BQA. And I've always been saying the BQA was nothing more than a precursor to GRSB. And sure enough, the BQA was interwoven in that conversation with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, even though they didn't talk about the GRSB, they did talk about continuous improvement, or they're now calling it continuous education. And they're all partners in it. Certified Angus beef, all of this is all partners of it. But what we have to really worry about is how the states are treating this, right? We know that Wyoming passed a bill saying EID, no, sir, we're not doing that. Right now, just in the last 2 days, I've been helping a couple of freedom makers here in Texas try to stop a bill that his is going to pass. It's going to pass. It's a bill relating to electronic registry of livestock in it's SB 503 in Texas, House Bill 147. It was introduced by a Republican representative named Ryan Gillen from down on the border. He's a former ag teacher, but he's also a former Democrat that just turned Republican in 2021. On the Senate side, a certified public accountant out of Lubbock is the sponsor of SB 503. And on the House side, it's been sent to the calendars. I
What's
mean,
it
they're
do?
gonna they're gonna vote for it. Well, what it does is so this is hard to explain, and that's why they're loving it. But Texas is a no brand state, so by law you don't have to brand. However, if you are in a county that you use a brand in, that brand has to be registered in the county. Okay, some form if you're using a RFID EID chip, if you're using a tag, an earmark, some form of identification on your animal to claim ownership, that has to be registered on the county level. Well, this bill is going to force the county clerks to report create and hold data on the county level of alternative. Here's the key. This is what they're arguing against. This is an alternative form of identification measure. Well, what would that be, right? EID, RFID. And so now the county clerks are all going to have to create a database that holds that information of this alternative form of ownership identification. And then that database, they are going to have to give that database over to the Texas Animal Health Commission. What this is an egregious overreach of what Jim Mundorf taught me a year ago or 2 years ago of measure, monitor, report, and verify. That's a third party. Texas Animal Health Commission is not a commission to oversee ownership authority in this state. They are not. And that's what these two bills will give them, that authority to oversee ownership of this state. Now, the proponents of this are saying, oh, it's not that drastic, but we're talking about incrementalism. And that's what I've been helping these two individuals with is the incremental aspect of it, number one, and then the property rights aspect of it, number two. Um, Two people that aren't even involved in the ag industry are pushing this, sponsoring this, and I don't know how it's going to come out. It's been, like I said, sent to the calendars in the House, which means it's going to be voted on in the House, and then the committee reports just yesterday in the Senate were sent out to the Senate members, and I think it'll pass. I mean, you know which organization is for it. Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers, they are for it.
And Texas
Um,
Cattle Feeders Association.
uh, the Independent Cattlemen of Texas have taken a neutral stance on it. I called them and talked to them at length about it, and their organization as a whole decided to go neutral on it. But it is, there no everybody's saying you can't prove that it's this incrementalism, that it's the RFID EID, but 2 plus 2 is 4. It's not that hard to figure out where they're going. And when you take that power of who oversees ownership of cattle from the county, and the county has no burden of proof on ownership of cattle. You just have to have your brand registered if you use a brand, but you don't have to brand in this state. There is no brand law in this state. It's a no brand state.
Right.
So
And you can probably use a brand and just if you don't have it registered, it's just not. I mean, you could just use it,
even if it
right?
is registered, there's no power to it. Me and you can live
So
in the
what's the
same.
point of registering it with the county?
Exactly. Exactly. I looked it up on my local county. There's like 16 brands registered in this county. You know how many cattle ranchers are in this county? Hundreds of cattle
Right.
ranchers are in this county. Me and you can register the same brand and use the same brand in this county. And the Texas, I think they're called the Rangers, a subsidiary of Texas Cattle Raisers Association. They have law enforcement capability on that, but you don't have to brand your cattle. In Colorado, Wyoming, Western Nebraska, Western Kansas, those brand laws are strict. New Mexico, movement, selling, all of that has to be inspected on site, and that's a whole different ball game.
I was just gonna say, like all of these laws, when it comes to anything, you know, anything agriculture, I think what people need to think about, who's this benefit? Does this benefit the producers or does this benefit the corporations? And there's like some crossover there, right? Because we have like in Nebraska right now we have this brand bill,
Yeah,
and it just so happens that we have the cattle feeder, largest cattle feedlot in the country ever being built that's going to house 150,000 head of cattle on a square mile. We went all through it before, but to go back to that, it's called black shirt feeders. They're supposedly going to be this closed loop, which I don't know. I've heard people who went down and like toured the place, and they didn't have any idea that it was only going to be beef on dairy cattle,
yeah.
which is it's a dairy guys AI their cows to beef cattle, and then they raise
More
these crosses
incrementalism.
that are specifically meant to just for the food system, I guess. I guess the process is they IAI these cattle. They pull the calves off at birth or shortly after birth. They go to these little huts in New Mexico, and then as soon as they're bucket fed milk replacer, I guess, and then as soon as they're able to eat out of a bunk, they go to the this black shirt feeders in Nebraska and live on concrete the rest of their life. So, and have their methane digested, however that's going to work. But I mean, so for that process, and the whole thing is like it's this closed loop system, and they're going to be able to fine tune their genetics to where they have this perfect uh, beef raising animal, I guess, beef producing animal. But they're
uniformly.
looking at it as they have absolutely no use for the brand law, this big corporation. And so all of a sudden, Nebraska comes out and says that they're going to exempt, this bill is to exempt all cattle feeders from um, using the brand law or paying the brand fees or having anything in their lots. It just kind of once it hits a feed lot, brand law doesn't work anymore. And that gets them out of paying for
What
the
they're trying to
inspection
do
fees.
is getting them out of it. And it's the way I understand it, it's going to create like a $1.8 million
Yeah,
budget deficit for the brand board. But I will tell you, in these brand states, those cattle have to be brand inspected into or out of a feedlot, and I'm specifically talking Colorado. There are some, I talked to my brand inspector about it the other night, and he said, "No, we have to inspect them, but we do have feedlots that kind of have their own self inspection system, but those are not very many. But we have to adhere to the laws, and the brand board in Colorado is self funded. In other words, they don't get taxpayer money on top to
right.
run that board,
That's
and
the
so I'm
same with
sure that's the
Nebraska, I
same
think.
way with
Yeah.
Nebraska.
Which means the ranchers are the ones who are going to have to fit the bill
Exactly.
when you have 1.8
Why?
million.
So who? So this was created by Senator Ibach, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And Ibach is retiring.
I don't know
I
exactly.
I would I
So
think
I think her husband used to be ag director in Nebraska. So I'm sure they're very connected with all the big
yeah.
wigs.
Well, and I know that
You think of Nebraska, Eastern Nebraska doesn't have brand law, and it's
right,
kind of a wonky line. I think it follows the
right.
counties, but and if you think of the feedlots, Eastern Nebraska are like smaller feedlots. That's how I think of it. Like there's a lot of them around Norfolk and stuff, which are like family owned and run kind of like Western Iowa used to be. They're a lot bigger feedlots, but then you go to the western side and it's much bigger, I think. Like you think
Yeah.
of Adams Landing Cattle and now this Black Shirt, which are dealing in the hundreds of thousands of cattle. Um, and more of the corporate, they're more of a corporation. And that goes into like who's making these rules, you know? It's never the little rancher that gets a law passed in his favor, right? It's always the big corporations.
Always.
They have their lobbyists and their way to get in there. They control Nebraska Cattlemen's Association. And yeah. And then you get into these, you look back on what we dealt with for like the last 10 years, and it's all kind of like, well, how did we get here? 85% of all the cattle processed in the US comes out of four different corporations. And
We got
guys
here
sit
from
back.
lack of congressional oversight. That's how we got
Well,
here.
it's incrementalism,
It's
right? Like how
incrementalism.
did we get here? It wasn't overnight. It was just and when fat cattle are over $2, all this stuff starts happening, and it just so happens EID comes in. They want to get rid of, they want to do all these things, and it's really easy when cattle prices are good, and there does seem to be like some positivity in the market. Guys don't want to sit there and complain and fight against stuff. They're just going to be like, yeah, EIDs aren't that big a deal,
Yeah,
you
which
know. And
which goes back.
that's the messaging that's getting pushed by these state associations,
Absolutely.
Farm
Absolutely.
Bureau, all of the same characters.
Which is the proof of what I've said all along. All of these issues are liberty issues. These are all about liberty and the taking away of our liberty at a little at a time. If on that black shirt feeders, if they would have to pay, what would that charge be? 80 cents a head to come out and inspect those cattle. That'd be $127,000. I don't know what the turnover is in that deal, but that would be significant money for the brand board to help them run.
Well, and it's
And
also a push for EID. Like they want this is the incrementalism. Well, we don't need cattle branded to go into feedlots, but they want EID tags in them. Adams
Yeah.
Land and Cattle, which before this black shirt came in, was the biggest cattle feeder in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Um, they EID everything that comes in. They have their own software that they developed that you can buy from them to manage your EID system. But you think about they had like, they background some and run some, I think, on they raised some on grass too, but I think their total number was right around 250,000. I'm thinking like their total number that they had.
I don't
Um,
know.
but you think about what that cost is to EID they showed that on their website. Every as soon as those cattle get there, they go through a chute, they get EID, information gets put in. And you think about that cost. Well, what if they didn't have to put those tags in? What if all that information was already on those tags? These are the people that want EID. They're pushing it. They're controlling Nebraska cattlemen's. If they can get cattle that just show up and have all the information on them, they can just turn them out. That's a big when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of head.
Yep.
That's a big deal,
It is a big deal.
and they should have to pay for it. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist. If they want to make a deal with producers and say, okay, we'll pay you this much above market value because you're doing this for us. But when producers just sit back and they're like, okay, require us to do whatever, they're just taking money out of your pocket, really. Well, I was just going to say, while we're on Texas, you've got a guy there pushing for mandatory country of origin labeling in
Yep.
Texas. I
Yep.
was really surprised to see that.
Yeah. West Verdell. He's House Bill 1385. It is just it's a very simple bill, one page. A retailer of beef must affix a label of country of origin to the meat or to the meat product that it has been created through. That's all. That's all it is, and it's very simple. West is in the 53rd district. That is a huge district in kind of central southwest Texas, big country. And he's really, I know Wes. I don't know him well, but he's a Second Amendment advocate and has been a freedom fighter for a long time. But he filed that bill back in November of 24. I talked to him yesterday. He says we're hoping to get it out of committee. That's where they're at on it. That's how long it's been, and that's where they're at. We're hoping we can get it out of committee. Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers is against it, as we well know. I'm not sure where the Independent Cattlemen's of Texas stands on it. I have not talked to him about that, but good for him. Good for him for taking a stand and doing that. I
Right.
appreciate that very much.
Even though it seems like it just helps to make these people show where they're at, right? Like
Sure.
it seems like when you have both, two of the most powerful state cattlemen's organizations in the country, both right there, and they're both going to fight it tooth and nail. Odds of it happening aren't good, but
Yeah. No.
but doing this kind of stuff helps to show. It just helps to show people where their association is and where their loyalties lie. Like, what's it going to help, the producer or the corporation? Going back to
Yeah.
that, what
Yeah.
would that rule help?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Everything we do, we need to ask that question. On the heels of that, Colorado has a mislabeling, a labeling bill that looks like it's going to pass, and it's Colorado's misbranding of cultivated meats as a meat bill, sponsored by Ty Winter, my good friend Ty Winter. I love that guy. He is my representative, and it's House Bill 1203. All it would do is require cell cultured meats to be labeled as such. So if they're creating those meats in Colorado, selling those meats, serving those meats, they have to be labeled as such in Colorado. It is on the calendar. Consent. It passed the House. It's going back to the Senate uh, today, and I don't know where Governor Polis is on it. If he
Oh, you do
vetoes
too.
it, well, he doesn't know. Um, if he vetoes it, it will go back, and they call a roll veto. I don't understand politics that much, but or at all actually. But it doesn't, just because he would veto it doesn't mean it would be dead. I think they would have another chance. Seems like he's got a lot of, no doubt it's communist Colorado, but he's got
Yeah, I was gonna.
both sides of the aisle for this labeling, which is a huge step for Colorado because we have
Yeah,
really
I was
fought
gonna
the
say
labeling issues.
there's something
Yeah.
sensible coming out of Colorado.
Yeah. Well, on the heels of that, let's talk about something nonsensical coming out of Colorado's House Bill 25003, sponsored by a long lost cousin, probably Tom Sullivan. It's the gun ban bill, and it prohibits manufacture, distribution, and transferring, selling, or purchasing of any semi-automatic firearm. Yesterday, it passed the House. It's going back to the Senate today. If it passes the Senate, it will go to the governor's desk. The governor has said, well, I'm really not sure if I'll sign it or not. We know that's a lie. He will sign that bill into law. It is the most comprehensive a gun ban bill in the history of our nation. It will require the Parks and Service, uh, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, to police that, and the sheriffs will be secondary and have to help them. I mean, it's a long bill, and I read through it, and it has all this stuff in it, and but
But
it
it's the main thing is no semi-automatics.
correct,
Even
correct.
oh yeah, because I mean I think I'm like probably most people that just hear there's a crazy gun ban bill, and I didn't really know the details of it. But like when you get into like I learned how to shoot with a semi-automatic 22. That's what
Yeah,
my
everybody needs to go read that bill. I mean,
because
it
semi-automatics, even if you don't know much about guns, it's pretty much
yeah.
everything. I mean,
Yeah, well, the sheriffs are against it. So
right.
I don't know. I don't know. I think Governor Polis will sign that.
And well, we can't get out of Colorado without talking about the painting.
The
Trump's
what?
portrait, the painting, Trump's portrait.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. He was not happy with that painting, was he?
At least there's something entertaining coming out of Colorado. If it's, you know, I mean, that's entertaining. That painting was something else. I've got Trump's response to it, and if you aren't familiar, and I think this came out like right after we recorded last week, but they hung this painting of Trump in and they took his chin off pretty much. He looks terrible
He
in the
looks a
painting.
little puffy.
But Trump's response was nobody likes a bad picture or painting of themselves, but the one in Colorado, in the state capitol, put up by the governor, along with all other presidents, was purposefully distorted to a level that even I, perhaps, have never seen before. The artist also did President Obama, and he looks wonderful. But the one of me is truly the worst. She must have lost her talent as she got older. In any event, I would than having much prefer not having a picture than having this one. But many people from Colorado have called and written to complain. In fact, they are actually angry about it. Exclamation point. I am speaking on the behalf of their to the radical left governor Jared Polis, who is extremely weak on crime, in particular with respect to trendy Aragawa, which practically took over Aurora in parentheses. Don't worry, we saved it to take it down. Jared should be ashamed of himself. That was the best. You know, that every once in a while you get reminded of why Trump won the election. Just stuff
Well,
like that. It's kind of like, is he serious about it? Like, how serious is he really? Because he throws some jokes in there about the artist is getting old, lost all her talent. But you know, it definitely bothers him. It
oh, sure,
definitely
it
does
bothers
bother him.
him.
It's not a
And
joke.
here's the thing: that painting cost him $11,000, and that lady that painted it apparently is from Colorado Springs, and Colorado Springs is a Republican town. I
Well,
mean,
that don't mean that she don't hate his guts.
well, that's true. That's true. Yeah, he was a little puffy in that.
Took his chin off, kind of.
Dadgummit. He's right.
Yeah,
He's right.
nobody likes a bad picture of themselves.
No, that's right.
Uh, anyway, one thing that came up that I found interesting, to go back, I guess to go back to Beef Magazine, Brett Kenzie came out and said, put out a tweet. He looked into who owns Beef Magazine, which really
Oh,
right now, I mean, there's really two major national corporate magazines, wouldn't you say? Industry magazines, Beef
oh wow.
Magazine and Drovers, or is there any
Well,
other?
for us, yeah, for the livestock people, yeah.
Yeah, for cattle.
Yeah.
For the cattle industry, Beef
Yeah.
Magazine and Drovers. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of really good um, ones out there, mostly regional, but the two corporate ones that are completely controlled by corporations. And Beef Magazine is owned by Informa. Is that
Mhm.
right? And they're out of London.
Right.
So America's, one of America's biggest beef publications, owned by Farm Progress.
Yep.
Farm Progress is owned by Informa, and if you go to the Informa website, they've got their ESG report all there and their climate sustainability, all this crap all over that deal. And so yeah, if as I put, if you needed another excuse to throw your beef magazine straight into the trash, there it is. But then a lot of people are like, "Why do I get these magazines sent to me? I've never subscribed. I don't, they just they're just wasting money sending me these magazines." Well, in the advertising world, which we're starting to get into, if you want to advertise on Lonesome Lands, email jim@lonesomelands.com. We've got our information together finally, but a lot of these publications, and I learned this when I advertise too. I get a box of I advertise in a magazine, and they would send me like 10 of them. Like I have a
Yeah.
store,
Oh
but
yeah.
they want to push out as many magazines as possible because the more
Yeah.
they print, then they tell their advertisers, this is how many people are seeing your.
Right. Right.
That's why you get Drover's magazines for free in the mail, and beef magazines and all the other garbage you get in the mail that gets published and goes straight into the trash can. These outfits just want to pump up their numbers of what they print, and then they're not lying when they say we print this many magazines, and that's how many people see it. Well, they can't prove that people don't see it, I guess, but
Sounds environmentally friendly to me.
but along those lines, this week, RFK Jr. came out pushing hard against banning pharmaceutical advertising. Um, was it just television advertising, or was it all across the board advertising?
Is he say I must have missed this. What did he say? He come out
He wants
against
to
banning?
ban,
Oh, he wants to ban.
yeah,
Okay.
pharmaceuticals advertising on. I'm not sure if it's television or not. Maybe I should look that up. But what I thought right away, because I study kind of media and how it works, and I've trying to make this thing work. Pharmaceuticals pretty much pay for those magazines. I
Right.
mean, they make those magazines. I mean, you go through them. I think I went through one and like half of the magazine was pharmaceutical ads
Yeah, all it
from
is that.
Elanco and which are
Right.
veterinary pharmaceuticals. Um, and so they talk about how it pretty much props up television and all the news programs, the pharmaceutical stuff, advertising. It also props up, the animal industry. Okay, so RFK's, and I'm not even sure if he's brought that up recently or if it's just been talked about recently, but the ban is for just television. But it got me thinking, what if we ban pharmaceutical ads in? What if all pharmaceutical ads get banned? Would that include veterinary
Animal health.
pharmaceutical? Yeah. Hmm. But talking about sponsorships, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is constantly, I mean, they're, I wish I could sell ads like they can sell ads. For a grassroots nonprofit, they are, they sell ads like nobody's business. And they have been announcing their Environmental Stewardship Award regional winners. That's what they've been doing lately. And I'll read from their I think it's their website or it might be from their Twitter. Environmental Stewardship Award is generously sponsored by companies and federal agencies who share the cattle industry's commitment to caring for the environment and protecting natural resources. Sponsors include U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources, Conservation Service, Corteva Agriscience, which that is like a chemical company,
Yeah, that
um,
makes a lot of sense.
and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So you have two federal agencies sponsoring a lobbyist organization's Environmental Stewardship Award. Where you at, DOGE? Right? Like,
Well,
I mean, that's how it's been, and apparently that's how it still is because those still come up um in the on their posts. There's like this award is sponsored
yeah,
by taxpayers.
but
You know,
we know,
they
even
love taking people's money and using it to enrich their program.
and
And then you
even
go into that relationship where they were paid. There's one year where they were paid by the USDA a large amount of money, and it was the year that the EID rule was implemented, and the year that they tried to push it down everybody's throat. EID on all cattle. But to go back to that award thing, I noticed how they give out, and I've always talked about this. Like they give out these awards, and how do they get the loyalty, and how do they get people to continually pay their dues and all this BS? And a lot of it's a state affiliate program, but the award thing is just like buying off, families and ranches, and we'll bring them in, we'll give them an award, we'll make them feel good, and they'll love us for the rest of their life. And I think it works.
it's
Um,
definitely a, loyalty program.
right. And it reminded me, I was thinking, I got into this book last time, the old Time Life book. It reminded me of the Time Life book. Um, so right here, I talked about on a past episode that I studied this book as a kid, and
Yeah,
I love that Longhorn stuff. I always got into Longhorn stuff.
yeah.
And so when I got out of college, I'll see if I can show you here.
Oh, wow.
That was built. Oh, I got my dirty shoes down there. My office is not quite finished yet. So that was built in 2008. One of my
Did you
first.
build that?
Yeah, yeah, I made that thing. So for you listening, I have a big Longhorn chair made out of Longhorns that I made. One of my really first big projects. I think there's like 30 horns in there. I can't
That's
remember.
phenomenal.
Maybe not quite that many, but anyway, and so I made that for a big show, the Western Design Conference. I think it was 2008, so I was like what, 26?
Okay.
No, I was yeah, 28. So, and I took it Jackson Hole, Wyoming, my first big show. I bought a booth. It was incredibly expensive. And I remember I broke even, but I broke even on the trip because I ended up wholesaling a bunch of horns to a guy in town. Um, and so that's why I was able to, it wasn't that bad, but I won. So if I keep turning here, that ribbon right there was
Yeah,
a Western Spirit Award, that I won at that show.
that's
And
cool.
well, it is, but listen to the rest of the story.
Okay.
Because this was my first, I was obviously like that's the show I met Tyler Crow at,
Mm,
but he wasn't an exhibitor. And, there was a handful of guys probably in their 20s, but most people were quite a bit older. And this was the first time I'd ever been to that show. And I think it was voted on. I can't remember if the judges like voted on them and the other. I can't remember how it worked, but yeah, it was voted on because I tied to get that award. I don't know if it was the judges that voted or the or everyone that came in that voted or whatever, but the people who counted the votes had me tied with someone else, and we both got the award. And so I went home kind of, disappointed that I didn't make a ton of money. And it was 2008. So the next year, I mean, that was
right.
right. It was
Oh,
September 2008. So the market crashes when I get home, which goes into a much longer story. But the next year, they want you to sign back up again. And it was expensive for a booth. It was the most expensive booth. I think it was more than NFR. But it's Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where all the
Right.
millionaires live.
Right.
And so and I was told, you could do all kinds of money if you got out there. But so the next year, but I was like, well, I won't have a booth. I'll just take my one product to the show, try to sell it. And it wasn't the best product. I knew I wasn't probably going to get an award. It was kind of an experiment and it didn't turn out as good as I'd hoped. But anyway, while as I'm there, they're announcing the awards and the Western Spirit Award comes up and the winner, it happened to be a tie again. So they had two winners again, and one of the winners was exactly what I was the year before. He was young in his 20s. It was his first year there. And he had a good product. I'm not saying anybody didn't have a good product, but it was kind of really made me think like, oh, they're getting people. They're getting loyal like people to sign up every year because they win the award and it
Yeah.
does. It makes you
Yeah.
want it buys you loyalty.
Sure.
It gets you into where you want to go every year. It
Absolutely.
gives you the warm, oh, I'm great. They're telling me I'm great. You know, and that's what
Yeah.
I think about when I see, it's not NCBA doesn't announce a environmental stewardship award. They have regional winners. And
Yeah.
then your regional winners, I bet you, I don't know how it works exactly, but I'm guessing the regional winners all get invited to the banquet
They
and
do.
they all
And
get a
then they
big
have a
pat on the
national
back
winner.
and
Yep.
warm and fuzzy, and they'll all get announced, and then they announce the national. So it's
Yep.
like they can put their claws into these people, and their kid, like you talk about, it's generational, the loyalty to these organizations that are fighting against, they're the ones pushing for mandated EID. They're fighting against the Prime Act, fighting against all these things that would help small producers. But the loyalty that they get, you said, was generational. Like grandpa was always a member of NCBA,
Right.
right? And now it's going to be, if you win these awards, well, grandpa, they gave that award to grandpa and it made him happy and he always showed it off and all this stuff. That's what I think of when I see environmental stewardship award. I'm not saying these ranches aren't environmentally conscious or don't even deserve an award. But what I'm saying is these awards oftentimes are buying loyalty. And when
Sure.
they try to find ways to award more and more people, like regional awards, they're trying to find ways to buy loyalty to more and more people. They're a scumbag organization.
And there are, I mean, I'll defend some of those. There are some really good. I like to see the diversity of ranches out there.
Well,
I
Andrea Hutchinson won the Chain Ranch won the Environmental Stewardship Award, and there are cases where
Yep,
this doesn't work because she has fought
tooth
against,
and nail, man.
she's
She's a freedom maker, man. She's not a
yeah,
freedom
Oklahoma
taker.
Independent Stock Growers Association.
Yep,
She
that's
helped
right.
create it as an option to the NCBA affiliate. She's fought hard in Oklahoma, and we're still working on getting her podcast together. But
I'm so happy to be a part of that too. I was at that inaugural meeting and am a member of that, and we, voted to see what we would call the organization, and that was just such a good meeting of independent freedom lovers. That's the common denominator of all those people. They all fight for liberty and freedom, and they all understand where the line begins and ends. And that was a cool night for me.
and that is something to tell people too is you don't have to be from Oklahoma to help
Yeah,
these organizations. These organizations that do stand up for producer freedoms and your liberty and all that stuff, they need help from everywhere. So if you go to Oklahoma Independent Stock Growers Association, I'm sure there's probably a way you can donate and
sure.
become a member or become a business member, all those different kind of things. They're trying to get one started here in Iowa. I think the meeting is April 2nd, so coming
Who's
right
who's
up.
putting that together?
Well, Bill Bullard's going to be there. I'm going to
Really?
make some phone calls today because I'm hoping to be over there. It's going to be in Ames. Well, Eric Nelson is putting together the Iowa Stock Growers Association, I believe it's called, which is, I mean, and that doesn't mean, there's a ton of good people at Iowa Cattlemen's that are members of Iowa Cattlemen's. I would not say leadership, I guess. But um, if you're a member of Iowa Cattlemen's and you're not a fan of EID mandates or all these regulations on your small beef packers or your local locker or any of this crap that NCBA is doing, it doesn't mean you don't have to give up your Iowa Cattlemen's membership to join Iowa stock growers. So I'm hoping to get up there, and I'm hoping there's it gain some steam. I want to
Yeah,
do
you need
what
to
I
get
can
up
to
there.
help.
Did you see what happened in Missouri with Missouri Independence? They were at the Capitol, I think, yesterday or the day
I
before.
saw Freddie all over my Facebook, and I
Yeah.
haven't had time to read it
Well,
yet.
they were just fighting for mandatory country of origin labeling, and they got some real traction. I didn't get into it too deep, but I congratulated them, and I'm sure proud of them. That group is they are, there's a bunch of those guys, Freddie, Ben, and I'll tell you that group of people are strong advocates for America and their rural lifestyle. I mean, they are independent as heck, and they are not afraid to stand up to the norm at the Capitol in Missouri. We all know that the Capitol in Missouri is basically controlled by Missouri cattlemen's. And these boys, they're not taking none of that crap. And I really, really respect them for it.
Yeah, good job, Freddie. Freddie
Yep.
Keaton and Ben Thomas
Ben
and
Thomas,
Larry Urton,
Larry Urton, there's a
all those
bunch of
guys.
them.
Yep.
Good, good people.
Yeah, and that's what we need. More of these it's Missouri Independent Cattlemen.
Hmm.
So
Or
there's another one.
independent cattlemen in Missouri.
Independent Cattlemen of Missouri. It's hard to
Yeah,
keep track of all the
it
names.
is. All these acronyms are. Ooh,
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just have Missouri Cattlemen's and you could support them and you wouldn't have to worry about them being a bunch of
we
globalist lobbyists,
Well, we could
NCBA?
have that
Yeah, I know.
if lobbying was illegal, we could have that.
Well, also, I think the checkoff reform and get that money out of NCBA, that would do a lot to
Would.
open things up and
Yep,
and remove some of their power.
agree.
So yeah, look up your local state independent and not your NCBA affiliate and help them out, or just help out Oklahoma stock growers or Iowa or Missouri, any of them,
I'm a
no matter
member
where
of
you're
all.
from.
I'm a member of all of them. I'm a member of Eric Nelson's organization, North Dakota, South Dakota, Missouri, Colorado, all of them.
I haven't even sent Eric my check yet. I'm bad about that. I probably asked him 6 months ago, how do I become a member? He said, send me a check. But they need to get a little more organized, but I'm gonna help. I'm gonna try to help. Um, Harriet Hageman. We talked about her last week. What is going on with her? Did you
Dude,
see that thing?
man,
Are
I
they
think
busing people for people not unfamiliar? Harriet Hageman, a very popular representative out of Wyoming, is doing these
absolutely
town halls, and they are filled with people yelling the F word at her,
hateful
screaming and
people.
yelling. She can't get a sentence out. And
I
what's
will.
really disappointing is like these people who hate Trump, like you see them on Facebook, and then they post that like, ha ha, like, I mean, that doesn't. It's kind of the same thing as like the State of the Union. I don't like to see it when Marjorie Taylor Greene's yelling and screaming during Biden's State of the Union, and then you know you can't support that and then also support these idiots holding their paddles up and yelling and screaming and booing the whole time.
Well, listen, I went to school in Wyoming and I've done some business in Wyoming and I love Wyoming. I love Wyoming. And I'm going to tell you, I have never met anybody like that in Wyoming.
Yeah,
Now,
I
I'm
know.
sure over there around University of Wyoming, they've got their typical liberal kids, but even the liberal kids in Wyoming are respectful. There is no way those
Yeah.
kids are from
And she had
Wyoming.
to cancel, like, she's had to cancel town halls, which it
Yeah,
goes
three
back
more.
to, I
Yep.
mean, town halls are put together so you can go out and talk to your constituents and see how they're feeling and get the feel of the it's not put together so you can yell and scream at somebody because you hate Trump. It's so stupid. I mean, if these people would be respectful and sit down and maybe get their voice heard, but when she's going to stand up there and you're just going to scream the whole time, and they're probably from out of state, so they don't want their voice heard because she'd be
Oh,
like, "So where are you from?" And they'll be like,
exactly.
Cheyenne. Isn't that a town here in this state?" They probably don't
Well,
know.
she has canceled two upcoming town hall meetings and she has had threats of violence at town halls in Wheatland, Wyoming. Now,
Yeah, I
Wheatland,
know.
Wyoming is super, super, super calm.
Yeah, I
Laramie
mean,
and Rock Springs. This is very, very confusing to me.
somebody's pinpointed her, like
Well,
somebody in
they've
the
pinpointed her, and I'll tell you why they have, is because she gave them a lesson in constitutional authority in Congress the other day, and I don't know what hearing she was in, but the guy running the hearing, uh, the representative running the hearing, he was like, "It is so refreshing to have constitutional expert in these meetings." I mean, she laid the law out. She said this is unconstitutional, and so that is what is making people go to her, pinpoint
right.
her as a problem. I have no doubt. I have no doubt right now. She is expert enough that she could run this country. She could be the president someday.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's probably they're showing you who they're scared of. That's what this
Yes,
comes down to. When they
exactly.
show up and they won't let you get a word out, they're showing you who they're scared of. And
Exactly.
they should be scared of her because yeah, it's like you said. She could run the whole deal
Man,
and would
she's a
be a great
bulldog.
one.
I love that woman. She is a good fighter. She's a
And would be a
freedom fighter.
nightmare for the communists. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which
um,
seems to be all over the United States. We got commies everywhere.
right. Did you so I never I still didn't go back and did you listen to Mumford and Sons?
Yeah, I listened to that song you told me to listen to. I
What do
was
you
like,
think?
okay, I remember that song.
Sad Hayrack Ride?
Yeah.
So we're talking about that because if you weren't listening last week, uh, Winston Marshall was the banjo player for Mumford and Sons. He's now like a conservative kind of commentator out of England, and he did a full podcast with Harriet Hageman.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's probably why she's getting some pushback too, is because
Absolutely.
she's getting her face out there, kind of nationally known,
Yep.
and they're
And
seeing
not
her as
only
a
that,
problem.
yeah, not only that, her expertise, her courage, but her ability to relay that message. She is so deliberate and she makes no mistakes. I mean, she is just cut and dry, beautifully said, and people are really threatened by that.
Yeah. And I got a feeling if, like we said last time, she's just a ranch kid that went to law school really, but if you're looking on for somebody to pick on, I don't think she's going to back down from a fight.
No, I
You
don't
know,
either.
if they think they're going to intimidate somebody, I don't think it's going to be her. So,
Yep, I agree.
hopefully anyway.
I agree. But
Um,
there are crazies everywhere, buddy. What was Secretary Rollins come out earlier in the week and said there's a huge announcement coming? What was the huge announcement?
Brooke
Do you
Rollins
know?
update.
Yeah.
I forget to
What?
do that.
She was in Hawaii yesterday.
Right. She's
Um,
still on the PR campaign. It seems like though, if you followed her going in as a cabinet member, it was
yeah,
almost like at her confirmation hearing, her answer, which I'm not blaming her for, is I really look forward to learning about that. You know, there was all these issues that she wasn't that informed on, which I would much rather someone be not informed than
yeah,
someone informed by lobbyists.
right.
Which is like the total ag committee, anyone on the ag committee, all their
Exactly.
information comes from the NCBAs and the farm bureaus. Um, but it almost seemed like she got in there and she was like, okay, what do we do? And it was like, okay, your first job, lower egg prices. You know what I mean? Because that's what she's really focused on. And she's probably like me, like, I'm going to take this one thing and I'm going to focus completely on it and I'm going to have a hard time doing anything else.
Do you think
Um,
that was an issue that American consumers were worried about, honestly?
no,
No.
I think it gets brought up in social media people who hate Trump and they're like, my eggs
Yeah.
are still expensive. What?
Yeah,
I thought you're going to fix everything.
I agree.
Um, I don't. I think maybe like I was going back to the system of a concentrated agriculture where
Absolutely.
one bird gets sick and you have to kill 10,000 of them. That's what needs to be focused on. But now, it seems their solution is they're going to import a bunch more eggs.
Yeah. It's a symptom of concentrated global corporate agriculture, right? That's what this is a symptom of. Um, everybody, I'm very pro egg. How does that sound?
You say you don't
But
eat eggs.
I don't eat eggs, but I'm
That's
pro
not very
eggs,
pro egg.
and I cook with eggs all the time. But I just don't think it was an issue that the consumer was that worried about, right?
I eat a ton of eggs, and I couldn't care less about. I mean, it's. I guess I shouldn't say I couldn't care less, but it's like if you got to pay $10 extra a week for your eggs or whatever, I buy two 18 packs at a time.
Do you really?
Yeah, I eat.
Oh,
There's a lot of mornings I'll eat 4 or 5 eggs.
oh
Me
my
and
gosh,
Ada, my
no way.
2-year-old, which she'll have half an egg maybe or an egg. Yeah, I eat a lot of them. Well, that's the thing. I've tried to cut out all this bad stuff, and so then you double up on the good stuff.
Okay, so this was 5 days ago. This was Secretary Rollins says big announcement coming soon with an airplane and a globe. And it says at POTUS is committed to strengthening American agriculture by expanding market access, securing fair trade deals, and ensuring our farmers and ranchers have the tools they need to compete globally. We will create a prosperous economy that will benefit farmers for decades to come. And she was on Fox News that morning talking about this, but nobody seems to know what this big announcement is.
Hmm. Well, maybe it's coming today. Maybe she's getting rid of the EID mandate.
Man, they have her on every single.
Yeah, she's out there a lot. But the thing of it is USDA is still filled with these measure, monitor, report, verify type
All
people.
of them, they're all the same. I said, we have to get rid of these holdovers that are pushing this anti America agenda. 5 hours ago, Secretary Rollins tweeted that another great day at USDA. So pleased to report that the USDA will now reinstate critical reports that the Biden administration recklessly canceled last year. Read more below. So, whatever that is.
I don't know. I
Oh,
mean, they stopped that
cattle
climate
reports.
start.
Cattle.
They
Sorry
they
about
did stop the climate smart money, which I mean, you can't. The other thing is, going back to what we talked about last week, where they want to build 7 million homes on federal lands.
yeah.
It's like I understand we're only 2 months in, so how critical can you really be? But it's like, well, okay, you're doing things, but you're doing these idiotic things. Like if
Yeah,
you weren't doing
things
anything and you were just trying to get organized and get your feet under you, that's one thing. But when you're coming out with ideas that are idiotic, and make no sense, and that nobody's gonna really get behind, I don't think. I guess maybe the Democrats will for affordable housing, but um.
not on public lands.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I don't know who would be behind that. But one thing, somebody was like, well, if you only use a half acre for each house, it would only take up this million worth of acres, which even if they weren't building on public lands, it's still a stupid idea. Like just to come out and say we're going to build 7 million homes with taxpayer money, like that's not what we need to be doing. Um, there's all kinds of different way, and I think that is something that should definitely be localized if you're needing more homes, and
Absolutely.
the federal government isn't one to figure out the best way to work that. It's the states and the communities. But also when it comes into taking federal lands, which is going to become a bigger and bigger issue, I think the Utah lawsuit is going to come back out, which or get reintroduced, which is they want to have control of all of their federal lands, which is a lot. The state wants to have control and the ability to sell all of their federal lands. And it reminded me of something Jack Payne was telling me, who, if you're curious, he was on a podcast a while back on here and talked about how the Navy is eminent domaining a big portion of his ranch. And it's not like the majority of his ranch, but it's a big portion. And the way he explained it to me and how he's trying to explain it to them is these ranches are built like a wheel, like a wagon wheel, and each portion is like a spoke. And when you pull a spoke out, the wheel collapses.
Absolutely.
So if you're saying, "Oh, it's just this many acres," it's not that big a deal. The whole, it's ran like a machine, and you're pulling a part out of the machine, and it doesn't going to work anymore
Yeah.
or the same way or possibly at all
No,
when you
at all.
pull a part out. So if you're like, okay, we have this federal land that you've had a lease on, you know, for 100 years and we're going to sell it off, that's possibly would destroy ranches, even if it's small parts of them.
It will destroy ranches. And the one thing that people don't talk about is lost opportunity cost. When you go into the ranching business, you're not going in the short term. You're going in for the long term. And so when the federal government comes and says, "Hey, we need to take so many acres out for the Department of Defense," or whatever the case may be, people aren't talking about the lost opportunity cost that these people are going to invest and are going to realize from hopefully profits down the road. You can't just take that land from people and say, "Oh, here's $1 million." $1 million doesn't go. Jack was telling me about one gentleman, they were going to pay 1,300,000 for a lost opportunity cost of like $80 million. That's something that has to be talked about because you put these people out, there's no more land. I've told you a million times, it's hard to lease country anymore. You can't
Hmm.
go and lease a ranch anymore.
Hmm.
It's just they're just not there. And so you put a guy out that runs 1,000 cows over 500,000 acres in Nevada on a lease that he owns, and you take that away, you taking his livelihood away. That has value, and people don't talk about that near enough.
Lonesome History.
Let's talk about it. What are we
Lonesome
going to talk
History
about?
segment. Well, I wasn't real prepared coming in. So, but one thing we've talked about, I think multiple times, is this book, Little Britches by Ralph Moody. And every time I bring this book up or anybody does, so this is, and I believe this was my grandmother's book because it
Wow.
has, my grandmother was the church librarian in the
Okay.
church I grew up in at the Church of Christ. And it has the library card from the Church
It
of
sure
Christ.
does.
And she would take her books in there and she actually typed hold on, I don't want to lose my spot. She typed a thing on like a post-it note there, and it
Yeah.
says, "This is a very interesting book. Men and boys will especially like it. If you like to read, be sure to check it out." So that's from
So that
Grandma
was your
Edith,
that was your grandma,
my
your
grandma
grandmother?
Edith Mundorf, and my dad would always tell me, when he was growing up, her house, which isn't there anymore. Um, there was a stairway that went up the middle of it kind of, and there was a bedroom on each side at the top on
Uh-huh.
the second level. And there were six kids, and some would be on one side. I think the older kids were on one side and the other kids were on the other. And she would sit on the landing and read books. And this is what my dad always remembers,
That's cool.
her reading Little Britches. But it goes into after what we talked about last couple of weeks, and this is just south of Denver, I think.
Yeah,
Littleton, I think
Littleton.
it's by
Littleton.
Littleton.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets into these water fights, which is like ranchers fighting for water, and
Hmm.
that was one interesting part I thought about. This part said the irrigation fight broke out soon after we got our cows. July was hot, the creek was low, and there was only half a head of water coming through the ditch. It started at the gorge where Bear Creek came out of the mountains. You know where that is?
Hmm.
You know where Bear Creek is?
Yeah, and now it's in Denver, isn't it? I'm
Yeah,
pretty
that's what I
sure.
was
Yeah.
thinking. I remember after I read this because I read it again to my kids, and I went and looked at a map, and I was like, "Oh, this is all city now." But it started at the Bear Creek each ranch, and each ranch all the way down had rights to so many running square inches of water. Some of it soaked in the ground as it moved along, and some was drawn up by the sun. But unless the creek was very low, there was enough for everyone to take his full measure. Each ranch had its own ditch box. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with this?
Yes.
They were wooden chutes that the whole body of water passed through, and each chute had a spillway with a gate to let out the full measure of that rancher's water right. There were gauge marks on the boxes, and when the ditch was running less than full, each man was supposed to set his gate so that it would take only his share.
Right.
So they, depending on how full the river was, is how where your gate was supposed to be put.
Yep, and the time of day too, and they roll this little steering wheel deal up, and it pulls your chute gate up so far to maybe a measured mark or something, and that will allow the right amount of water for a certain amount of time, and that will equal your share of waters.
Did you ever have anything like that?
No, not where I no not my family didn't have that, but my grandfather was a ditch rider for the cat. I think it was the not Catlin Canal. There's another one over there at Fowler, Colorado, for years and years, and I went with him a lot to put this. Give these farmers their water, and there would be dang sure farmers stealing water, and he'd put a lock on their head gate, and
So who was he employed by?
he was employed by the ditch company, which was a cooperative of people that owned the water
So
rights that
yeah, it
go
was
down
like a
that ditch.
co-op of all the ranchers.
Correct. Yep.
And
That's
so
right.
this was a county deal, or
Well,
it
the
was just
ditch
the co-op. So how
it's
far
the
would he go?
co-op, so it didn't. Each ditch is different. The one that goes through Crowley County, Colorado, is called the Colorado Canal, and that lets water off at Boone, Colorado, and takes it over to Crowley County, where those farmers would own that water that came from a certain source in the mountains. Well, it all comes down the Arkansas River, and they divert these. This is where it gets confusing, but there's a I think it's pre-appropriated rights, water rights. These people became cooperatives years and years ago, and they would unite and form this company. They'd have the water, lay claim to the water or buy the water, and then that water would come out of the Arkansas River down a certain ditches. There's Catlin Canal, Colorado Canal, Rocky Ford Ditch, all of these things, all of these ditches that people own different amounts of water that come down. Uh, the thing now is though that you know Denver and Aurora is buying up all of this water, and it's drying up the country.
Which has been going on for a while, right?
Yeah, been going on for a while.
Yeah.
But I think where Little Britches is in the south. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that's the South Platte River Basin that comes out of the mountains on the north of Denver and goes northeast towards Nebraska, and then in Nebraska, east of Ogallala, it converges with the North Platte River system
Okay.
and becomes the North Platte River.
Yeah. So this book is just about a young kid. He wrote this when he got older, but it was all about him growing up, kind of on a homestead in Cal. It wasn't like a ranch; it was more like a homestead in Colorado,
Yeah,
early 1900s, I believe.
yeah.
And then he becomes like a cowboy because, of course, every kid that grew up on a little homestead
Wants to
saw
be
the
a
big
cowboy.
cowboy. Like there's parts where he's first time he saw, a cowboy with his leggings and spurs and all that, and how he all of a sudden wanted to be a
It's
cowboy.
awesome. Yeah,
And then he went on to write other books. I have another one called The Old Trails West. But this goes on and says there were water hogs near the head of the ditch, which those were the guys who were able to take it all.
yeah,
And they were men who would take their full measure of water and more too. When the creek was low and crops were burning up, there had been a feud between the ranchers at the head and the tail of the ditch ever since it
sure.
was built. The first that I knew much about it was one night. Okay, so then it just goes on and talks about it, but it gets back into the book kind of follows the whole water fight the whole way through. And I think eventually they may have left the ranch because of it. There's one part of the book where he talks about the first time he ever saw a car, like horseless carriage was coming down the road, and it gets out in front of their house, and the guy in the car. This was the night they were going. There was this big trial about water rights and
Yeah,
who was stealing and who
yep,
wasn't. And the day before the trial, they saw this car, and everybody comes out on the porch to see the horseless carriage driving by. And
sure.
once they get up to the house, the guy pulls out a gun and shoots at them and shot him. And he said it missed his dad's head by a couple inches. And
Over
his
the
dad,
water.
yeah, it was all over the water deal because it
Yeah,
was right before a trial and he was going to
yeah,
testify. So I'm sure it
yeah.
was like an intimidation thing.
Yep.
But he said his dad ran and got a horse and took off after him, was shooting.
The
But
biggest fights in American history are mostly over water.
yeah, but it's a great book. In the one page that I've posted this on social media and stuff, but it's pretty cool where he talks about his dad. he talks about his dad giving him a talk about what kind of man to be. And he said he just stood there for a minute as if he didn't know what he was going to say. Then he put the stool right down in front of me and sat on it. He reached out and took a hold of my knee hard. His voice didn't shake then, but he talked low. Son, he said, I had hoped you wouldn't run into anything like this till you were older, but maybe it's just as well. There are only two kinds of men in this world, honest men and dishonest men. There are black men and white men and yellow men and red men, but nothing counts except whether you're honest men or dishonest men. Some men work almost entirely with their brains, some almost entirely with their hands, though most of us have to use both. But we all fall into one of those two classes, honest and dishonest.
Wow. That's
It
right.
goes on. Any man who says the world owes him a living is dishonest. The same God that made you and me made this earth, and he planned it so that it would yield every single thing that the people on it need. But he was careful to plan it so that it would only yield up its wealth in exchange for the labor of a man. Any man who tries to share in that wealth without contributing the work of his brain or his hands is dishonest. Pretty good,
That's really good
huh?
stuff.
Something every kid should hear, I
Wow.
guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of goes along the lines of, I've said all along that under this new administration, we all have to make that choice, right or wrong. We're going to do it right or we're going to do it the wrong way. And so that kind of reminds me of that,
Yeah, I
It-
mean, I think about all that. It goes back to all that stuff, the climate stuff, the
yeah,
EID stuff. Like, why are we doing this? Are you being honest about it or are you being dishonest?
exactly. And, Jim, I have a hard time, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I have a really hard time with all these members of these organizations that are uplifting these anti-freedom policies that like to post about scripture because the scripture doesn't talk about these things.
Hmm.
And it to me it's anti-God, but uh it I'm anxious to see where all this rolls. I know we're just brand new into this new administration, but they are going to have to make a stand. And I said that in an interview here a while back, that these new people that have been confirmed or appointed to these positions, what stand are they going to make? You're going to do it the right way and be honest, or are you going to do it the wrong way? And
Yeah. And I would
so,
say, to go back to these lobbyists that work for these big corporations, any any man who tries to share in that wealth without contributing the work of his brain or his hands is dishonest.
amen. That's right. That couldn't
That's how I would
that could
describe a lobbyist.
that couldn't be said any better.